I welcome you all to a fresh episode of Trailblazers, Charting Paths, Inspiring Destinies. Domestic abuse can be very confusing. It comes interspersed with good times and bad times. This makes it very difficult to recognize, especially in cases of emotional and psychological abuse, whether is it abuse or simply a situation of conflict. That which is not identified has the capacity to scar deep, which can be traumatizing and are usually invisible. Years together, domestic abuse is understood as a family matter and not a violation of human rights. Emotional abuse has been normalized and accepted as part and parcel of life. Considering the conditioning and the stereotyping of abuse propagated by society, nobody considers the impact of abuse caused on its recipient while it is almost passed down as a legacy. Domestic violence and abuse exists across all economic strata, age groups, and genders. In India, every 4.5 minutes, a woman is afflicted with domestic violence, and it has impacted to the Indian economy, which is almost 4 to 8 million, which has emphasized the critical need for intervention. We all agree that there are good men, good women, bad women. So is abuse not a gender problem, but a behavioral one? Does the victim only needs help or the abuser too? I take the privilege of introducing Ms. Ekta Vivek Verma, who is a social entrepreneur with more than 25 years of experience. She is a human rights activist and a gender-based violence specialist who currently leads two non-profit initiatives, Invisible Scars and Purnaviram. She founded Invisible Scars Foundation in the year 2016, which works on issues of gender-based violence with a focus on domestic violence and abuse, sexual harassment at workplace, diversity and inclusion, gender equality and empowerment, rape culture, and mental health and well-being. Ekta is a women leadership empowerment trainer who helps businesses in developing workplace domestic violence and abuse and workplace sexual harassment policies. She is also a certified PSH professional and an investigator, a human rights advocate, a storyteller and curator, and a development sector professional. She is also an active member of several community organizations, including SAHI, which is Society of Advancement of Human Endeavors, Society of Cyberabad Security Council, also a part of Trade Infrastructure for Export Scheme, and TEDx Hyderabad. She was recently featured in the book She is Woman in STEAM, which honored 75 Indian women in celebration of the India's 75th Year of Independence. She recently organized the first ever Telangana Domestic Violence Stakeholders Summit in March 2024 in Hyderabad. She has been awarded Women of Impact Award 2024, the Women of Worth Award by Ladies Circle India in 2021, Nari Niyogan Award for Women in Societal Innovations in 2020. At Invisible Scars, she has helped almost touch 3,700 plus lives based in 65 cities and 12 countries, which has, while reaching over to more people through awareness and sensitizing sessions. Today, she speaks to us about breaking the cycle of abuse. Welcome, Ekta. The platform is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Subhashini. If you see the very first slide, I say domestic violence and abuse awareness, and I say not a family matter. One of the myths of domestic violence and the reason that a lot of it is not reported is because everybody thinks, oh, this is a family matter. This is a family matter. This happens within their home. What do I have to do with it? And probably by the end of the session today, we would sort of understand why this is not a family matter. And if people would have heard the words domestic abuse and domestic violence separately, as an organization, we have consciously chosen to go with the word domestic violence and abuse so that there is no confusion in what exactly happens when this happens. Like we say, 1 out of 3 women in India face domestic violence and abuse. So it means that 33% of our population of women who are adult women mostly, because domestic violence and abuse statistics are calculated for adult women, face domestic violence and abuse. We say that a woman faces an abusive incident every 4.4 minutes. there are no reliable statistics on how many children or how many men are impacted by abuse, right? So when we look at domestic violence and abuse, now we don't only look at women. Of course, women are affected disproportionately because this is an issue that impacts women more. However, we do not have any count of how many children or how many men are being impacted by this. And like Dr. Subhashini already has told you, there is an economic loss also to the country, and that stands somewhere in the range of 479 million to 880 million per year. Now, it's an estimate. It's an estimate because the economic output of the country is lowered by such a massive amount. And you see that there is a gap, like 479 million, versus 880 million. The number falls somewhere in between. And this is a massive amount of money that is lost due to this particular tragedy that happens. I call it a tragedy. And we probably see why, if you look at headlines, here are just some, this is like when you just do a Google search and you say domestic violence news, right? This is the kind of thing that shows up. It says not rape, domestic violence is the top crime against women. It says motivational speaker accused of domestic violence by wife hours after wedding. A Delhi women helpline said they received 6.3 lakh calls in a year. This was during COVID. We've already heard of Gautam Singhania. And then the most alarming thing is what we see at the end. We see that it says that India, this is a report that was recently published that says India might witness rise in domestic violence due to climate change. So we are not looking at something that's going to go down. As we progress, one would estimate that these are numbers that are going to go down, but unfortunately, these are not things that are going to go down, and this is what a particular climate study tells us. So it is very alarming when we look at read these news in the newspaper. We think, oh, what has this got to do with me? Why should I pay so much attention? Okay, every family has its disputes, but we'll soon understand why it is not the way it is, right? Let us just do like a quick analysis. And I would love to hear everyone's comments over here, let us talk about Shalini, okay? So Shalini is 34. She's a software engineer, obviously well-educated and is working at an MNC. She has an angry spouse who is also an alcohol addict. He uses foul language and shouts a lot all the time at home. He is forever asking Shalini for money for alcohol. He does not take up any household responsibilities and is always out with his friends. The children don't like being around their father. They're always scared. Shalini is anxious and unhappy, and she's worried about the safety of her children. She's worried about her safety, her economic condition, and of course, her performance at work. So now I'm going to ask everyone, please use your chat boxes and tell me what kind of abuse do you think is, first of all, Shalini facing abuse, right? And if she is, what kind of abuse do you think that she's facing? It's absolutely wonderful to see that we are in a set of people who understand that abuse is going on, right? Now, if we were to offer Shalini help, what do you think would be the right way to help her? Yes, someone says typical scene, but different professions. Definitely abuse, yes? Yes, but we are with a very, very elite set of people here today, right? A lot of this abuse, people don't identify, right? Shalini is a software engineer. She's working at an MNC. She has an alcohol addict spouse. She has children. She is still living in that family and she's not moving out. That is so mind-boggling that all of us can see that she is going through abuse and, she's unable to move out. She's 34, she's still young. Yes, absolutely. We have to listen to her problem, ask her if she needs any help. She should be encouraged to walk out. Absolutely. So thank you very much for your responses. Let us look at another case, right? And we will understand all of what is happening and why it is happening. So Oh, here is Rupa. Now, I brought up Rupa's case because I thought a lot more people on the group will identify with this particular case. So, Rupa is a homemaker. She's pregnant for the third time in her 4 years of her marriage. She's miscarried twice earlier. I hope that's the right way to say it. The husband kicks her and beats her when they have an argument at home. When the husband is angry, Rupa is starved and not given food. She is forced to work non-stop at home, and she doesn't get any time to rest. Her parents are not willing to take her back. She's very unhappy, depressed. She did tell her doctor. Of course, her doctor was curious, and she told her doctor that, look, this is what is happening to me. The doctor acknowledged what was happening to her, but did not know what to do, further. And so Rupa felt even more hopeless and sad, right? So I would love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you think Rupa is going through? What do you think she should do? Okay, somebody says, understand her perspective, help her way out, listen and witness one such scenario. Fear, depression, may also feel suicidal. Yes, Dr. Vita, absolutely right. A women's helpline number. Does she have any children? No, she doesn't have any children. Rupa should seek counseling and talk back to her husband. She needs help and support. Yes. So, what we realized, whether it was Shalini in the earlier case or whether it is Rupa right now, both of these women do not find the support that they need. And it is very, very unfortunate that, while we are heading towards the 21st century, we are still unable to provide support and help to women who are facing domestic violence. And I will talk about women on the session today, largely because, of the audience that's there with us, and also because women face this in higher numbers. So we've just sort of done two very, very basic case analyses. Let us understand what is domestic violence. Right? Why do we call domestic violence an abuse? What is it? We can all understand, they go through abuse, but do we understand what is abuse? So, domestic violence, and look at the words marked in red. It is a crime and it is a violation of an individual's human rights. There are laws against domestic violence. So, when we dismiss it and say, oh, it's a family matter, we are wrong. It is not a family matter. Domestic violence and abuse is a crime and a violation of an individual's human rights. It follows a pattern. So whenever you look at domestic violence and abuse, let's take Rupa's case. We'll see that every time they have an argument, that's when he kicks her. So he doesn't keep kicking her all day and all night, right? There are good days, there are bad days in an abusive relationship. But the pattern is that every time they have an argument, that is when he kicks her. It is done repetitively. Again, we have seen in the case of both Shalini and Rupa that the domestic violence was committed repetitively. This person would go out, the alcoholic husband, he would go out, he would drink, and he would come back and then he would just start shouting and screaming, using alcohol as an excuse, right? And what is the objective of domestic violence? Why does domestic violence happen? So domestic violence happens usually to dominate a survivor, I don't like using the word victim, but everyone is not a survivor. There are certain victims also. But the whole idea is to dominate them, control them, let them follow. This happens. I think this is a very Indian society thing as well. As soon as a woman is married, she's expected to come home, take over everything, and start running the house as if she's been running it for 50 years. There are no scopes of mistake. You're not allowed to make a mistake. You're not allowed to do things of your choice. You usually have to restrict your entire life to your husband, to your children, to your in-laws. And which is why, the control and domination that exists, we have normalized all of it. Okay? And usually in abusive relationships, there is a power imbalance. When we say power imbalance, we mean one person is in a stronger position, not physically stronger, but in a stronger position. And what do we mean by that? When we look at a husband and wife relationship in a society like India, we realize that the wife gets married and she leaves everything behind and she comes over to this new house. And so the dominant relationship with the husband is naturally the dominating partner because his entire family is there. His mother is there, his parents are there. And so he becomes the dominant partner. And so there is a power imbalance. We see that one person in the relationship has more power, and that person usually controls the person with the lesser power in the relationship. Domestic violence and abuse can happen with anybody, it can happen through anybody, right? It could happen through a partner, an ex-partner, a live-in partner. It could happen through in-laws. It could happen through parents, siblings, children, and anybody that you share a domestic relationship with, right? A lot of this is not too much spoken about. We don't talk about parental abuse as much. We don't talk about sibling abuse as much. We don't talk about children abusing their elderly parents as much. There is a lot of emphasis on intimate partner violence and violence through in-laws, but we overlook a lot of the parental, sibling, children abuse. And we must know that anyone can be an abuser. Anyone from any gender, any socioeconomic class can be an abuser. And this is very necessary to understand from the perspective of understanding domestic violence and how it is a crime and a violation of somebody's human rights. Everybody has a right to education. Everybody has a right to dress up in the way they want, eat the things they like. And anyone who's taking away any of those rights, and I'm not talking about fundamental rights in terms of constitution, I'm talking about the right that you have as a human being. As a human being, you have a right to your choices. And that entire choice is taken away when you are facing domestic violence and abuse. Okay, so what is the cycle of abuse? This is something that I will not explain too much because not every relationship follows this. But just to give everyone a sense of, what patterns are, I think this would be a great way to understand. And a lot of relationships do follow the cycle of abuse. It starts off by tensions that build up. Then an abusive incident happens. And when the abusive incident happens, the abuser normally comes back. They apologize, they cry, they beg, they do everything to bring back their victim into the fold of abuse. And then for a few days, everything is very hunky-dory. And then we go back to an abusive incident. So this is a very repetitive form, and it does happen in quite a lot of relationships, may not be the exact same way. Now, why is it important to understand this is because a lot of times we dismiss an abuse victim saying, oh, but yesterday she was roaming around with her husband. She seemed absolutely normal. Where is she facing abuse? I don't think she's facing abuse. I've seen her, they were taking pictures. They were putting it up on Facebook, or putting it up on Instagram. And so we tend to normalize and minimize the pain of an abuse survivor. Not understanding that they may be in one of the phases of this particular cycle, right? So I will take a quick pause here and ask everyone, am I going at a good pace? Is this interesting? Do you want me to talk about something else? So when we move on, right, we have heard this many, many times. I think a lot of us tend to do this as well. They say, but it's conflict, right? When they're fighting, when we go to the police station, everybody says, but पति पत्नी में तो ऐसा होता है, but सास में और बहू में ऐसा होता है. We even have serials made on सास बहू that normalize all of what is happening in their lives, calling it सास बहू की कहानी. So we have normalized these actions on a daily basis, and we have to ask ourselves, okay, is this conflict? Do we need to, normalize situations like this, or should we have a deeper look at this situation, and should we understand whether it is conflict or abuse? So whenever we are trying to determine whether it is conflict and it is abuse, and I will explain the reason why we need to determine whether it is conflict and abuse, but we should ask these questions, right? As I already explained, there is a power imbalance already in the relationship. One person in the relationship holds more power, the other person holds lesser power. And when we ask ourselves, we have to ask ourselves, is the relationship between them that of equals, or is it unequal, right? Does somebody in the relationship hold more power versus somebody in the relationship who has lesser power? Are the scales tilted in any particular direction? And this gives for a wonderful understanding of whether or not it is conflict or abuse. Then the next question to ask ourselves is the relationship based on love, or is it based on fear? So you might meet someone who tells you that, oh, no, I'm very scared. My husband will come home by 4 o'clock. I need to be home no matter what happens. If I am not home and he is home by 4 o'clock, I will get into very serious trouble. So this person is not wanting to go back home because she loves her spouse. She is wanting to go back home because she's scared of the reprimand that she will get. So we have to ask ourselves, is the relationship based on love? Is the relationship based on fear? And when we ask these questions to a survivor, these are very, very normal questions that you can ask. So, are you in a hurry to get home? Do you have anything waiting for you? Will you get into trouble if you get home on, you're late for something? Or do you like wearing a particular kind of clothes? What do you do? Have you changed your habits of eating? All of these things are very, very small indicators that the relationship could be abusive. Of course, we cannot look at it based on one particular aspect. We have to join everything together to look at it. So we should ask ourselves these questions: that is this relationship based on love? Is the relationship based on fear? Do conflicts result in resolution or no resolution? So this is a very simple one. When we have a conflict with a friend, usually one of us goes back and apologizes and says, hey, look, I'm sorry, I wasn't right. I shouldn't have said something like this. You resolve, you shake hands with each other, and you're back to your normal selves. I think we have all done this. We all have close friends or close family members, and we do fight with each other. It could be for any reason, but whenever there is a resolution, it means that, this is just a conflict because it was resolved. However, if you see someone going in circles, right, there is no resolution to this particular topic. And there are constant circles that this person is moving around, and this issue is not getting resolved. So you meet someone, she tells you in year one that I'm being abused, I'm very unhappy. Then you see her go back and she's happy. And then she comes back again and she says, you know what, I'm very unhappy. I tried to resolve it. We've involved family several times. And then the third time she tells you, but now the kids are growing up, and we've tried to involve the kids and the kids are getting impacted. We are seeing that this is dragging on and on and on and on. And over years, there is no resolution to this particular, to what is happening. And which is why we cannot call it a conflict. A conflict will always have a resolution. Abuse will not have resolution. Abuse will be circular in nature and it will continue to happen repeatedly in patterns like we explained. Do those in conflict apologize or do they blame? So it's a very simple thing. When somebody makes a mistake, what do? What is their first reaction? Do they start blaming other people for their mistakes? Or do they take a breath and say, hey, look, maybe I was wrong. Let me think about my behavior, right? And then, of course, that person can come back and say sorry. So when there's a conflict, when you're not getting along with your friend and you've had a fight over something, you go back and you say, hey, sorry, it's okay, chill, yaar, like, let's just move on from this. You say sorry, they say sorry, and then you become friends. But when there is abuse, one person's always blaming the other person. So you are responsible for, I lost my job yesterday. You are responsible for it. I had an accident. You are responsible for it. I did not get good food. You are responsible for it. And when you see that there's a lot of blame being placed on the other person, that is when you realize that, it is not conflict, it is abuse. And it is very easy to blame someone else and not look inwards. And when you apologize, you're actually looking inwards and saying, oh, probably I did something which was not right and maybe I need to take the blame and I need to say sorry. So I think these are very, very small things which can be observed, which can be seen, which can be noted down. And you can, it's very easy to catch if this is an abusive relationship or if it is a conflict, a relationship with conflict. So do those in the relationship feel free or do they feel trapped? When someone asks you or tells you about their situation, you always have to sort of ensure, what do they feel? Do they feel happy when they go back to their spouse? Do they feel happy when they go back to their abusive family members? How do they feel? Do they feel free? Do they feel happy? Or do they always feel trapped? Oh my God, I don't know what to do. Especially we've seen this a lot in parental abuse. That because children feel so obligated to go back to their parents even when they become adults and they are doing very, very well, they continue to remain trapped in these relationships because these are abusive relationships. They've been following the cycle. The parent always had the upper hand, more power, right? And suddenly now, they are unable to get out of these emotional traps which the parents have set for them. So whenever you are looking at a relationship to see whether it is abusive or this is just a conflict, and before you dismiss anyone and say, oh, ghar ka jhagda hai, ye sab to hota rehta hai, I think it's very important for us to pay attention and see whether or not these are the factors that are influencing the relationship. I'm moving on to the next section. This will be very, very simple. We are just going to be telling you what are the different kinds of abuse. How will the survivor support herself when both in-laws and parents leave her in societal norms? I think we'll answer this at the end of the session. I'll definitely try and answer all your questions. I will continue to move ahead in the session. The woman feels that if she leaves her husband, society will not accept her child. Yes, that's the truth. Conflict is non-repetitive. Abuse is repetitive. Absolutely. So I think we are getting there. I'm grateful for this session. And moving on. So our law, what I'm trying to do today is I'm just covering the abuse which is covered by our Protection of Women Against Domestic Violence 2005 Act. You can Google search for the act everywhere. It talks about 4 different kinds of abuse which are covered by law. Everybody's heard of the infamous 498A, and 498A, for the information of everyone, covers cruelty in a relationship. And of course, this is a women-centric law because, from time immemorial, it has been that, we've been living in a society which is controlled and dictated by men. And so women are always, a step below. And that is why the laws are women-centric. I don't see any changes happening soon, but going on. So physical violence, very simple. It's visible to everybody. You can see the hitting, you can see the slapping, you can see kicking, biting, strangling, burning, punching. Lot of ways in which physical violence can be perpetrated. This is the most visible form of violence. This is visible to everyone because it does leave marks, it does leave injuries. A lot of cases that would be coming to the doctors would be because there's been some physical violence, and the survivor comes to you in a lot of pain or hurt or in whatever situation, and then you can actually see that something's happened to her. Right? Emotional and verbal abuse. Now, this is very, very insidious, and it's very, very difficult to identify. It's not easy to identify emotional and verbal abuse because we have normalized a lot of things in our lives, right? When someone taunts you, you just take it as a joke because a lot of times this person will taunt you, they will say something to you, and then they will say, oh, but I was just joking, And the most common example is when somebody points out the color of your skin or your weight. And if you feel bad about it, they usually come back and tell you, oh, but I was joking about this. I didn't mean it that way. Why are you so serious? Why do you take everything so seriously? And, when you call someone a name, you call them stupid, you call them idiotic, and you're continuously saying things like this to them. So it's not just saying it once, it means that, you're continuously saying things like this. You invalidate their feelings. They come to you saying, look, I'm feeling very sad today. And you tell them, what is wrong with you? Why the hell do you feel sad all the time? Stop coming to me. So you immediately invalidate their feelings. You humiliate them. You tell them, I think this is very common in our society where girls are told, तुम्हारे माँ बाप ने इतना ही सिखाया है क्या? Have your parents only taught you this much? I'm sorry, I'm breaking into a little Hindi. I hope everyone can understand these little phrases. But you're told that, is this what your parents have taught you? You're degraded. You're told, oh, but you don't cook properly. Look at my mother. She cooks so well. You're defamed. You're defamed within the relatives, and you're told, oh, she's very lazy. She doesn't wake up on time. She doesn't like to do ghar ka kaam. She's forever busy with her work. You're blamed for everything that goes wrong. So it's almost like, the man did not have an independent life before you entered his life. But the minute you entered his life, you become liable for everything that goes wrong in his life. Or you're ignored or you're isolated. Isolation is also very dangerous because when an abuser isolates you, they put you in a spot. They tell you, oh, I don't like your friends. I don't like this set of friends. Let's not meet with them. And then you're so in love with your spouse that you say, it's okay, why can't I make a little compromise for my, spouse? And they end up isolating you. But when the problem starts is when you realize that you have no one left around you because your friends have been isolated and you have pulled yourself away from them. So it is very, very important, to recognize these things, to see I will repeat that they should happen in a pattern and they should happen over and over again. Once doing any of these things does not amount to abuse. It has to happen repeatedly and it has to happen in a pattern. Of course, we have economic abuse. So whether you're sabotaging someone's education, you're sabotaging employment, you're financially restricting them, you're stealing their inheritance, you're not sharing your assets with them, you have accumulated debts, you expect them to pay off your debts. And it's not abuse if it's mutual, right? I may have taken a loan. A lot of families take financial decisions together and both spouses pay for the financial decision. And it does not amount to abuse if it is happening with mutual respect. However, it amounts to abuse when it is happening by force. When you are told that, no, I've taken this loan, you have to pay it off because I've married you. And so it is now your obligation to pay off the loan, right? And of course, using somebody else's income. We have so many women who have absolutely no idea what their bank balances are because their entire salary gets transferred. The entire salary gets transferred to a joint account. The husband handles all of the money. And, we've had multiple cases and I can give you examples of this. So we had a very senior corporate person. She was earning almost to the tune of 50 lakhs per annum at a very senior position. You would not think that she did not have. And so they would go out on holidays and the husband would take charge of all the money. And he would not give her even 10 rupees. If she wanted to buy a water bottle for 10 or 20 rupees, she wouldn't even have that much cash with her. And so when she came to us, we told her, we said, why does he have all your money? Why is your money not going? You want to give away, you're not obligated to give away everything. So these are things that happen on a very regular basis. These happen to a lot of women. So education really has nothing to do with empowerment. When we talk about empowerment, we don't always talk about education. This can happen to anyone in any socioeconomic class. Sexual abuse. So sexual abuse is sort of on the border. It's fence-sitting because people are start talking about marital rape. However, marital rape doesn't have a law, but sexual abuse is covered by the Protection of Women Against Domestic Violence Act of 2005. And these things fall in sexual abuse, of course, uncomfortable or any form of forced sex. When the victim's consent doesn't matter, or when the victim is forced to have sex with, other members of the family. And we had this horrific case. I'll take a minute and talk about it from Bangalore, where this very, very rich family, they wanted a child in their own bloodline, so to say. And so the son and the daughter-in-law were not able to conceive. And so the son told the daughter-in-law, look, we are not able to conceive together. I would like you to sleep with my father. And initially she resisted, but it got very bitter. It got very violent. And so she had to sleep with her father-in-law. And nothing happened there also. And then she was forced to sleep with her brother-in-law. That is when she objected. So it was already so late and she was already in such a deep mess that there was no way that relationship would have survived, and there was no way that the woman would have come out feeling good about herself. And she was manipulated by using force and by using gaslighting methods to get her to sleep with her father-in-law. It was very unfortunate. It was one of the worst cases, that I've dealt with in a very long time. Unfortunate. Manipulating a victim to have sex, sexual insults like calling her, names or slurs. I don't want to use those slurs in the session itself, but, calling someone a slur. which has a sexual connotation, someone who hurts their victims with objects, or someone who withholds sex to punish. This is also one of the ways in which sexual abuse happens, is that people withhold sex to punish their partner. They say, oh no, I won't sleep with you because you didn't cook the food I liked, you're not wearing the clothes I like, you didn't go out today, you didn't take care of my mother, you didn't do this, you didn't shop properly. It could be any reason. It could be as simple as there was extra salt in the food. We've had people who've withdrawn from sex for months just to punish a spouse because she has not done what they've asked her for. So these are the 4 forms of abuse that are covered by the law. We will look at a 5th form also, although this is not covered by the law, but this is very important to understand. With the growth of digital media, we are seeing a lot of cases of technology-facilitated domestic violence, and this is unfortunate, but it is the reality. It is happening now. So 3 years or 4 years back, there was this guy who was caught because his wife reported him. What he was doing was that he was live streaming his intimate moments with his wife on Facebook. And she did not know. She thought he was a software engineer and maybe his laptop is, you usually have the laptop open on the table. She was not aware that he was live streaming their intimate moments, and he continued to do it for a year or so before she finally discovered that their moments were being live streamed. And this is somebody that she should have felt safe with. But unfortunately, he was live streaming and using that for whatever God alone knows. We have also seen that a lot of spouses make fake social media IDs. They think, oh, my wife is maybe having an affair with someone, so let me quickly make a fake ID and trap them in that fake ID. They morph pictures because in India, of course, everything is related to your izzat, right? And because everything is related to izzat, so when these pictures come out, and these pictures could be morphed, they could be fake, they cause a lot of trauma to the people who go through them. It also partially falls into cyberbullying. But if this is done by a close family member, it sort of falls into digital abuse. And then, of course, cyber blackmailing. When you are with a partner, what you do is you share all your intimate experiences with them. You tell them everything. It could be about a first boyfriend, or it could be about how you had a sexual fantasy. These are things you share with your partner. And if it is an abusive partner, they even blackmail you with respect to all of these things. We've seen a lot of victims' phones getting hacked, spyware on victims' phones getting installed, using text or WhatsApp to harass a victim, and threaten them. Now these days, a lot of WhatsApp and text is being used, social media is being used. So this is something that is growing very steadily because a lot more digital media is now in focus. And so we should be paying attention to these things. Are these things happening to anyone? And of course, this happens to children a lot. And this can be through close family members. Since we are talking about domestic violence, I will not stray off the topic, but it is possible that close family members, siblings, all of them could be involved in abuse like this. Anyone can be an abuser. That's what I say. So we should always be mindful that this can happen to anyone. I hope I'm on time. It looks like, I am doing okay on time. So why are we here today? I think it's very important to understand. Why are we here? Why are we doing this session? What is the purpose of talking about domestic violence? It may not directly concern anyone of the participants, but there is a reason why we are here today, right? Do survivors seek help? This is a very critical question. And of course, the link of this, I can share the link of this if anyone wants the link of this, is almost 76.6% of people have never told anyone what they are facing. They've never told anyone. And 14.3% people seek help. So if you go back to the statistics I shared with you, it says that 1 out of 3 women are facing domestic violence. And these are documented numbers. This is NCRB data, right? which is when FIRs are registered, so that data goes into the NCRP database. Now we say that 1 out of 3 women is 14.3%. So what does it mean? Does it mean that domestic violence exists in absolute numbers? We don't know. If 76.6% people have not spoken up and only 14% have spoken up, we are looking at 1 out of 3. What happens when we look at 100% people speaking up? So it is very, very important to understand why are we here today? Why are we looking at these numbers? We are looking at these numbers because we want to be those people who listen to what others have to say. There is a certain section, we are sensitized, we come in contact, with a lot of survivors. And how can we help them when we understand why we are trying to help someone or trying to make them speak up? We, Invisible Scars Foundation, and thanks to Dr. Rita here, we have come up with a plan to set up a crisis center within Fernandez Hospital. And we are working on the plan. The plan is still underway as we speak. And, you would tend to think, why? Why do we need a crisis center in a hospital? Will it not interfere in our work? What will happen if we set up a crisis center in a hospital? But I want to be able to share a few reasons why I think a crisis center should be in a hospital and why I think doctors are always and usually the first point of contact. Usually the healthcare system is the first point of contact for victims or survivors, whether you are facing physical violence or you're facing emotional abuse, or more often than not, you tend to reach out to either, if it's physical violence, to a general physician or your obstetrician or gynecologist or even your mental health professional, right? So the healthcare system is the safest and it is easy for a survivor to reach out to the healthcare system. You immediately get support services for pregnant women and new mothers. We are looking at this specifically from a Fernandez standpoint. A hospital is a confidential and safe environment for disclosure and seeking help. Now, one of the things is if you're in an abusive family and you tell your family members, I'm going to the doctor, right? The chances are more than, maybe mostly what will happen is somebody from the family will accompany you, but going to the doctor is also considered okay, pretty much, because that is not where you think that someone will speak up, right? So when someone says, I'm going to the doctor, it is considered okay. I'm not feeling well. I would like to see a doctor. At the most, what will happen is a family member will accompany a victim to the hospital. When a victim comes, say, with repeated injuries or repeated patterns in which certain things are happening to her, there is a chance of early intervention there, right? So someone is coming, like we had Rupa. Rupa was young. Rupa had already suffered 3 miscarriages. On digging a little deeper, she actually opened up to her doctor, and the doctor did not provide any relief to her. So she went back feeling even worse about herself. Whereas if this doctor was trained or sensitized towards domestic violence, at least she could have referred her to a support group or to a helpline or something like that, right? So early intervention, we all know as doctors here in the audience today that repeated miscarriages is not good for a person's physical well-being. Then healthcare providers are very sensitive. They're supposed to be people who save human lives, right? So the sensitivity level expected of a doctor is, of course, very, very high. And I've met some wonderful doctors. And we feel that, if there is education and training for healthcare providers, whether it is doctors or whether it is the allied staff, education and training, at least when someone comes to us, we make them feel comfortable, we make them feel safe. At least that's there. And of course, improved health outcomes for a mother and child. If a mother is going through domestic violence and she's pregnant, so they can be improved health outcomes. And there is a chance to develop better treatment protocols for survivors of DVA. When we have survivors of DVA coming to the hospital regularly, we will know how to treat them better. And I don't know the technical term for it, but, better protocols can be developed for checkups or, evaluations and injuries and things like that. So that's something as a hospital we can make a lot of difference when we set up a crisis center. And I want to highlight that this is already being done in Bombay with the Dilasa centers. There are about 12 Dilasa centers in Mumbai. This is already being done in Bangalore. Vaidehi Hospital also has a crisis center. We are trying to replicate the same model, and we are hoping that once we set this up, we will be able to lead the way in Telangana with this, as with a lot of other things that Fernandez Hospital is doing. Why does DVA happen? I think this is very, very critical, and I'll quickly run through this because I'm seeing that we are good on time. I think I have another 10 minutes. Why does DVA happen? There are 4 major reasons. One is cultural, the other is conditioning, the third is economic, and the fourth is psychological, right? So cultural, when we talk about cultural, we talk about, it is not okay to, answer back. Very, very simple things that you should not answer back to your elders. We are never told that if an elder misbehaves with you, what do you say to that elder? And we always told, no, it's very rude to, respond to an elder. If they're being rude to you, it's okay. Just compromise, just adjust. It's okay. They are elder to you. But we are never told that if an elderly person is misbehaving with you, how are you supposed to react in that situation? There is, of course, a cultural stigma against divorce, and there is excess interference from parents. It could be parents, it could be in-laws. In India, everybody's business is everybody's business. Everybody thinks, I am free to say whatever I want, and I have a right to speak. And there are no boundaries, and the lack of boundaries is very, very sad. Of course, conditioning, when men are told, ki tu joru ka gulam hai kya? Have you, are you your wife's servant? If a man listens to his wife and he's helpful and he's nice to her, most likely he's going to be made fun of by his other friends who will tell him that, why are you doing this? Isn't this your wife's job? Isn't she supposed to do it? Why are you helping her out? Right? Women and girls, of course, being viewed as a liability. This starts from very, very early on, from the time a child is born or maybe even conceived. And the fact that women are forced to compromise and adjust. All our lives, women are told, compromise karo, adjust karo. Whether you're in the workplace or whether you're with a partner, you're constantly told to compromise and adjust with the situation. You're told, and it's very, very common. We do this so common. It is so common. Don't laugh too loud. Don't wear very loud clothes. Don't walk too loud. Dress up decently. There's so much conditioning that happens to women. And everything is about compromising and adjusting in situations. It is whether it's about the way you like to look or the way you like to be. And it was very funny. Renuka Chaudhary had come as a speaker for one of our TEDx events. And she said that the only reason I was accepted in parliament was because I was wearing a sari. Right? And despite all of that, I think a lot of us have heard ki wo Ravan ki tarah hasti hai, or there is always jokes being made on women everywhere if they are seen moving out of those boundaries. And it happens within homes as well. Of course, women being economically dependent on their husband's lack of education or not having the right kind of education. The girls in Indian families are told, acha, whenever you get married and go to your in-laws, if your in-laws allow you, you continue your higher studies. And this is I don't know how common it is in South India, but I know that it is extremely common in North India. Girls are told, you want to travel, you want to take a vacation. When you get married, wherever your husband takes you, you go. So it is very, very sad, incomplete or less education and pressure on men to earn. This is another outcome of patriarchy. I didn't want to use the word patriarchy, but it is important to use it here, is that men are pressurized. Patriarchy is very, very harmful, right? It also pressurizes men to do things. So we don't train women that, look, you have to earn, you have to educate, you have to become educated, you have to earn, and you have to take care of the family. There is no pressure on women as such, but there is a massive amount of pressure on men to earn and to support their families and parents. And the whole reason that parents want sons is because they want their bloodline to be taken ahead and they feel hamara khandan aage badhega. And that puts a lot of pressure on men also, right? And when a man is constantly pressurized by society to do certain things, either they also suffer from abuse or they become abusive themselves. Then there is a lot of shame in seeking help from an NGO or police. I still get calls to this day saying, oh, but can I do something without involving the police? And this person would be getting beaten brutally, but she just doesn't want to go to the police. There are so many stereotypes and so much of shame is created. And, we do have police helping out people. It's not like they don't help people. But if you don't go there at the right time, in the right way, and you don't tell them clearly what you want, the chances of you getting the kind of help you need are almost non-existent. And of course, going to a mental health professional is a massive stigma in India. Everybody who goes to a mental health professional is classified as crazy or mad. They just have two words for crazy and mad. So everybody is either crazy or mad if they're going to a psychiatrist or if they're seeing a psychologist or they're taking counseling. And so people do these things in shame. A lot of this happens in shame, and there is absolutely zero awareness on the negative impact of abuse on children. Now, one of the most common stereotypes I hear women saying is that, but my children need both parents. And I think this is the most commonly fought stereotype. I fight this every single day, where I say, but children need a healthy environment. They don't need two parents. They need a healthy environment. They don't need to live in a toxic household. And so it is very, very important that these stereotypes are broken, and we fight these stereotypes. And as a set of people, we understand what these stereotypes mean. And how do you support? This is our last slide, second last slide, sorry. You listen without judgment. You don't judge. You don't think, oh, she's come to me. She must be like this, or she must have done this, or somebody must have done this. Just listen without judgment. Don't pass a judgment. Believe when the survivor tells you this is what happened to me. Do not sympathize. Do not say, oh, I feel so sorry for you. Yeah, so bad. What are you going through? Please do not say things like this. Say, okay, I understand. Please go on, right? You should assure them that they are not at fault. If someone comes to you and they've been battered badly, they wouldn't have done nothing to attract that battering. Let me tell you that much, because what we tend to do as human beings is we say, oh, you must have provoked him. You must have said something. Why did he kick you so badly? He's not mad. You must have said something to provoke him. So, this is very important that we assure them that no, what has happened to you is not your fault. It is because this person is abusive. Ask them what help they need. So there's a spelling mistake here. Ask them what help they need. We do not prescribe help to anybody. When people come to us, we say, what do you need? Let the survivor tell us what they need. It's important for us to listen to what they are saying, because what we may think is right for them may not be what they need. Okay? Share available options for help. Assess the level of danger they are in. Right? This is very important for cases of physical violence. The recent case of Shraddha Walkar, it was a horrific case. This girl was in a live-in relationship with a boyfriend, and they lived together for a few years. And every single sign pointed towards the fact that this was bound to happen to this girl. And it happened because nobody paid attention to the red flags. So assess the level of danger they are in. And also, one thing I would like to inform everyone here today is that if a case of domestic violence leads to murder, the case moves from becoming a domestic violence case to a murder case. So in your statistics that we calculate, which is the NCRB data that tells us these many women have been abused, if a woman is killed, her case does not go into the NCRB data of domestic violence and abuse. It goes into murder. So I want you to understand this little nuance also, because the statistics then you will see are not robust at all. And of course, don't force your advice on them, and keep yourself safe and objective. So if you are helping someone, you should always know to what extent you can go and help someone. If you are not comfortable in helping someone, please do not help. Do not help because you've attended a session. Only help if you feel personally responsible and you feel it is safe for you. You have to keep yourself safe. If you feel it is not safe for you, please report it to us, an authority. Do not venture out to help yourself. Don't go to people's homes and try to patch them up, and don't do things like that. Please keep yourself very, very safe. That is a request to everyone. And here are the numbers where you can help. So we have our domestic abuse helpline numbers. 100 is the number of the police. 181 is Sakhi Center numbers. Then we have 1090 in a few states. And I think 1090 is now being converted to 112 in the rest of the states. Then we have women commissions. Each state has a women commission. We have a national commission for women. We have state women commissions. And we have protection officers. And I'll tell you something very funny. So the other day I was going through the Cyberabad police website and the protection officers' numbers were given. And I'm sorry to highlight this. I was trying to tell you where to seek help. But none of the numbers were working. And it turned out that nobody knew where these protection officers were. So it was very unfortunate. I'm just stating it because we are talking about protection officers, and if you go back and do a search, you might not get through to any one of them. You can write to the police. You can reach out to any women's police station. It is always preferable to go to a women's police station that is closest to you. Or you can directly write to any senior official via email. Everybody's emails are these days very easily available on Google. If there is any child abuse, whether it is sexual or non-sexual in nature, you should report it to 1098. Child abuse on no account should be tolerated. And then there is the National Commission, NCPCR, and Child Welfare Committees. So whoever you know, please report it. 1098 is very, very critical, especially if you know that there is any kind of violence or abuse with a child. There are multiple NGOs working in the space of domestic violence and child rights. You can Google search for them, reach out to them, talk to them. Facebook is full of contact details. You can reach out to lawyers. So whenever you're reaching out to a lawyer, the critical thing is to see whether they handle family cases or not. So if you are reaching out to a lawyer to help someone, please check if they do family cases and domestic violence and divorce cases. Then only reach out to them. Reaching out to a civil lawyer may not be the best idea, because they may not know how family cases work. And every state and district has District Legal Services Authority. In India, women are supposed to be getting free legal help through the District Legal Services Authority. Of course, the model is not robust, but in some states, they are being done properly. Women are getting legal help, which is free of cost. Women are entitled to legal help. But again, sometimes what happens is someone from a lower socioeconomic class approaches and someone from a higher socioeconomic class approaches. So it is more likely that the person who cannot afford it might be given legal help because we don't have enough lawyers. The pro bono legal system is a little broken, but still it's important that if anyone comes to you for help and they need legal help, you should first refer them to their local District Legal Services Authority. And of course, counselors and psychiatrists, counseling centers, psychologists, psychiatrists. We have Sakhi centers, we have the Mahila Mitra, we have Bharosa, we have counselors and psychiatrists who handle domestic abuse cases, and hopefully we will have two of them as well once our project goes through. So here is where you can report the abuse. You have to ask the survivor whether they need you to report the abuse or not. Please do not report on their behalf because you feel that they are being wronged. Let them take the initiative of reporting it. This has to come from the survivor. And thank you very much for your time today on the session.